In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Thanks, Lisa. We're joined by Jennifer Griffith, acclaimed author, storyteller, and host of the popular podcast About Your Mother. Her deeply moving memoir, Both Sides of Then, Finding Love After Abandonment, takes readers on a powerful journey through family secrets, generational trauma, and the search for healing. Jennifer's story is one of resilience and discovery as she uncovers the painful truth of her mother's past, one that shaped their relationship in ways she never fully understood. Through her writing and her podcast, Jennifer explores the defining moments of motherhood, identity, and the echoes of the past that shape our present. Jennifer Griffith, welcome to the conversation.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm blushing. What a great intro. Thank you.
What inspired you to write the book?
Growing up as a young girl, when my mother spoke about her childhood being raised in an orphanage after losing her parents, she would stop a room and people would listen and take her in and say, "Oh, you must write a book." Or when my mother played the piano, it was haunting and mysterious. And I knew it was deeply connected to her learning to play the piano in the orphanage. And so that was my original intent. My mother could never go there, she said. And so I took the vignettes and stories she told me and originally wrote her story. And my voice was bookend at the beginning and the end, saying, here's why I'm writing my mom's story. And I worked with a fabulous editor, Rachel Howard, who said, it's good, the first draft of it, it's good, but it's a little sad. And I wanted more of you. And to get to your question, when did you think you would write your story? I never thought I did until Rachel encouraged me to. And so essentially I wrote my mom's story first. And in writing my mom's story, I was empowered to write my own narrative more clearly after understanding everything that my mother went through as a young girl. And by embodying her existence and writing her narrative as I did in first person, a crazy thing happened. I could write my story in a clearer way because I truly understood the woman my mother was before she was my mom.
Is she still with us?
She is. She's 82 years old. I let her read a chapter early on, one chapter. And there was a little bit of a resistance. And I had a writing coach who told me, oh, no, don't do that. Because if you invite people into your writing process, they will get in the way. Writers know this, right? If you start taking too much feedback early on, you get roadblocks to your own narrative. And so I finished the book and I let her read it a little bit before it came out. And she's very proud. I thought she would have a problem with me writing her story. But actually, the challenges she had was around my own narrative about what my childhood was like. And it seems silly to say that now because everybody says, well, obviously, yes, she was your mom. Some of the takeaways maybe she didn't love. But now she is incredibly proud. And we have a deeper relationship now because I think she has a better understanding of me as a woman and what my experiences were like. And we can have more honest conversations. And so one other thing to say to that is my mom is incredibly proud to bring voice to the girls who went away, the young women that were forced to relinquish their babies in the decades before Roe. She's very proud of that, of putting voice to that experience.
The book's title, Both Sides of Then, has a very distinct echo to a Joni Mitchell song. Is there a connection?
The Joni Mitchell song, Both Sides Now, was the inspiration for my mother's voice and for the title. And only after I submitted the book the final time to the publisher did I come across an article that Joni was also a mother that had to relinquish her child before Roe. So there's a deep connection there to that song, the words, and it really allowed me to write my mother's story the way that I did because I could take in those haunting lyrics. But the synopsis of Both Sides of Then, it is the story of my mother's life being raised in an orphanage in Philadelphia after losing her parents tragically, and after emerging from that orphanage, relinquishing her firstborn in the decades before Roe. And then it's also the story of the impact that those experiences had on the mother that she was to me.
Jennifer Griffith is our guest. Her website is byjennifergriffith.com, and her book is Both Sides of Then, Finding Love After Abandonment. Was the feeling of abandonment something your mother passed on to you?
In therapy, as I was writing the book, a very wise therapist said to me, "You too felt abandoned by your mother." And that really was my aha moment. And as I say that to you right now, I get chills because for me, on the outside looking in, she was raised in an orphanage. How on earth could I, who had two parents living in a home and a dog and a cat, feel a similar feeling of abandonment? But it was emotional abandonment because at the age of 13, that's when both of my parents changed and they were no longer just my parents. They were people with a story. My mom found her son that she had relinquished, who was 18. So she sat me down when I was 13 and said, "What do you think if you had a brother?" And he showed up for my 14th birthday a month later. And so then she immediately became a woman with a story. There was then and now. There was my mom then when she was just my mom. And then there was my mom now in the moment where she was now a woman who had relinquished a child, even though I knew every day she loved being my mom. Her goal in life was to be a mom, the thing that she lost when she was a young girl. And then on the heels of that, months later, my father came home and said he no longer wanted to be a part of the family. And so he became a man with other wishes and desires. And so at that moment in my life, they just became different people and they weren't as present. And so it took me this writing process and a lot of therapy to realize that I did have similar feelings of abandonment because of those moments.
And this all happened at age 13 when your sense of self was developing.
Absolutely. And you know what, Terry, what is really interesting is that this book came out when my son was my age. And so as I'm writing this and I'm hearing people like you say that to me and I'm watching him, I look at him and say, "Oh my gosh, I was so young. I was so young for those two things to happen at the same time." And that's where that feeling of abandonment, that was the really hard thing to face. Because as an adult, as a 50-year-old woman now, I look back and I think, well, gosh, what did that do to me? How many years did I lose? Because to your point, I was creating a sense of self, but it's very hard to do that when both of your parents leave you in some way. And my mom, of course, was leaving me emotionally to realize this dream of finding her son, which I can completely empathize with. And my father was leaving because he no longer wanted to be a husband.
What was it like meeting your brother for the first time?
It was awesome. So he came a month later on my 14th birthday. So you can imagine I'm 14 and I'm wearing a spree sweatshirts and terrible makeup and I've got a lovely attitude. And so I think for me, it was very awkward, but exciting. I can still remember what I was wearing. I can remember my body shaking because I was so overwhelmed by emotion. But I also remember that we didn't talk about it. There was no conversation about what happened to my mom, what the dynamic was in society. She never really wanted to talk about it. And I think, that's some 40 years ago. I think that was one of the motivators for the book is because I wanted to make sense of it, not only for myself, but for her.
Tell us about your journey toward healing.
This has been a long journey. Journey being an overused word. I think, obviously writing is incredibly healing. Talking to other authors, revisiting the past and working through it and recreating it and putting it into a form that people can digest and give you feedback on. That's community, that's healing right there. But healing for me, physically and mentally, has been running. And running was a way that I found pride in my body and my mind and a way to work through things that maybe were weighing me down. And I think in many ways, memoirists, although in families, everybody's like, oh boy, here comes the memoirist. Here comes the one that's going to open all the kitchen cabinets and show what's inside. I think memoirs, all of us can say our main mission is we are trying to heal. We are trying to take the things that are passed down in generations and the kind of trauma that lives in our DNA. We are the ones who are called upon to say, okay, let's talk about it. Let's put it out in the world so it doesn't feel like it contains us.
We are in conversation with Jennifer Griffith, author of Both Sides of Then, Finding Love After Abandonment, and host of the popular About Your Mother podcast. Those of us who write often admit that the process can be painful, joyful, and ultimately therapeutic for both the author and the readers. What was your experience?
I saw that my experiences as a young girl influenced the mother I was to my son. And I saw that some of the things that I experienced were not necessarily going to be a good thing unless I worked through them. And so this book is a love letter to my mom and her ability to be a hero against the hardest of circumstances. I mean, life tried to knock this woman down so many times, beginning at the age of 6 and on, and she kept on getting up, and she had a dream to have a normal life, and she was going to have it, and she wasn't going to let anybody stop her. It is also a love letter to my son to help him understand the woman that I was before I became his mom. So as he goes through this parenting journey with me and walks away with things he liked or didn't like, I want him to understand what my motivators were and who I was as a woman before I became his mom. And that is a universal theme that I tapped into in this book that I think people are reacting to is we all have a mother. But how many of us know our moms as the woman they were before they became our parent? And a lot of people, I go in rooms and I say, raise your hand if you have a mom. All the hands go up. And then I ask the second question. Do you know the woman she was before she became your mom? No hands go up. And that to me is amazing. And it's this universal connection we all have to our mother's story. And I want to celebrate that. And I want people to humanize the woman that is your mother, to really give compassion, because then that compassion extends to yourself. And that was my big takeaway in writing this book.
You are also a podcaster and conduct the About Your Mother podcast. What brought that on?
Well, there's this thing. If you want to sell a book, you have to have a platform. No, I'm kidding. It is true, though. I did write the book. I did it a little backwards. So I wrote the book and then I built the platform. But what I realized was, as you're going out in the world and trying to get published, what I realized was I didn't have time to write more. I was a busy mom. Writing the book was really what I had time for. But I wanted to talk to people about what I had discovered when I wrote this book, that if you really want to get to know somebody, ask them about their mom. Truly, it is like the best starter question of any conversation of anyone you meet. And so I formatted the podcast around that. And I've talked to amazing people from all over the world. And it fills my bucket. The podcast fills my bucket in a big way and is tied to the takeaways that I learned when I wrote my memoir.
What was it like when you first told your son the story?
Oh, yes. Well, it's funny. One little footnote. My mom told my son, you can't read that book yet. You're not ready. So he loves his grandmom, and he is not giving away the ending, but you could do the math. My son is my mother being able to reconnect with the son that she had to relinquish. And it's a beautiful relationship. And when I told him I was writing the book, he watched me over these years build the platform, build the podcast, write. He saw how, as you know, messy and grueling it is. And I think my proudest moment is he looked at me and he said, Mommy, you've been working on this so long. I'm so proud of you. And I think every parent would like to hear that, right?
Was your mother's story on your mind when you became a mom?
It was. And it's interesting, when I was giving birth, that really was when I realized I had to tell my mom's story. Because when I was giving birth, I thought about her, and I thought about how she was alone and no one loved her when she was delivering her first child. And that they told her, do not touch him because it'll make it harder. And my mom, although she wasn't physically in the room with me when I was giving birth, the maternal lineage and the trauma that gets transferred down generation to generation, I felt it. And I said, okay, I have a job. I have to clear this table, and I have to write the book that explains these moments in my family.
What has this journey taught you about the power of forgiveness, both towards others and toward yourself?
Forgiveness is a superpower. There were a lot of things that happened in my life, that in my childhood specifically, that were incredibly hurtful and damaging, that took me a long time. You asked about healing. That took me a long time to heal from. But forgiveness is a path to acceptance. And acceptance is when you can truly accept somebody with their faults and their gifts. That's pure love. Love is messy. Love is imperfect. And we get these Hallmark ideas and these these Hollywood ideas of what love is supposed to look like. And that is just not real. And one of the gifts that I was given almost 9 years ago was being able to walk my dad to the other side of life. And that was a profound moment in my life. That allowed me to see, look, not everything was perfect between the two of us, but we talked about it. We had conversations around those moments that were very difficult. He told me 2 days before he died the reason that he wanted to leave when I was a young girl. And I thought, he's asking me to forgive him. And I do. And now I accept him completely. And I love him. And I think that's what I'm really encouraging people to do, is sometimes you have to have tough conversations in families that require forgiveness. But on the other side of that is acceptance. And acceptance is love, right? Isn't that what we all want? We want to be accepted for who we are, faults and all, mistakes and all, shame and all. And so that to me is the power of forgiveness, is on the other side is acceptance.
Did your dad's disconnection from the family impact your relationship with men in general?
Oh, Terry, we need another hour. Well, the early lineup was not great. So if you line all those guys up, they weren't great. It's a great question. I had a really hard time knowing what love was, like what it was like to have a man love me in a really healthy way. I had to go through a lot of painful relationships, and ones where the partner or the boyfriend or whatever they were at the time wasn't really present. And that felt so familiar. And I broke that cycle, knock on wood, but I broke that cycle in my first marriage, because in my first marriage, I definitely recreated exactly what I knew. It felt really familiar. And I had a wake-up call. And I said, I've gone and done it. I've gone and recreated what it felt like in my home when I was a teenager. And you know what? No, I'm going to walk away. Nice guy, but it felt the same. It was very, as my father felt, just very detached from what was going on in our home. So yeah, it took a while. Lots of therapy and writing and running to get to the point where I could say, I deserve this, and universe, send this to me.
What feedback have the book and the podcast generated?
Well, I've had a couple people reach out to me and say, I really needed to read your book at this time. One was a friend that left a relationship that wasn't working very well. And so I think there's a lot of people. This is the beautiful part of story. As you know, when you share your story, people begin to see themselves in your narrative. And so that's been the overwhelming feedback that I've gotten about my side of the story, is people seeing their own struggles in mine, although they aren't exactly one-to-one. They're seeing, I went through that, and that's what I was feeling in my first marriage that I left, I have a hard time. I've had some women come to me saying, I have a hard time knowing if this is the right balance in a relationship because of their own story.
We're talking with Jennifer Griffith. She hosts the About Your Mother podcast and wrote the book, Both Sides of Then, Finding Love After Abandonment. A question I'm sure every person listening is wondering is, how did you find Mr. Right?
Well, at work, he's a good man. I'll tell you what I did, Terry. I'm a big believer in this. I'm a little woo-woo. After I was 34 years old and I woke up and I knew I was getting divorced and I knew I also wanted a family and there's some age issues there. And I knew I was going to have to act fast or I was going to, adopt and raise a child on my own. But on my 34th birthday, I woke up and I said, here on a piece of paper, I wrote down the 10 things I was looking for in a partner. And I put it in my dresser drawer. And I kid you not, he showed up 3 months later.
Isn't it interesting how when you define something like that, it has a way of manifesting?
I think that's the magic in life, really. But it's also, I think, the work, getting to your point earlier, of taking the time to know what you want, right? Nobody in my young life told me about relationships. I certainly did not have the model of a healthy relationship in front of me. And also, my parents weren't talking to me about, well, here's what you look for. So I had to go through that lineup that I told you about, all those wrong relationships, to know, no, these are the 10 things I want in a partner. And he showed up.
What do you hope your readers and podcast listeners will take away from your message?
I hope they take away that all of our struggles, and we all have them, we all have a little bit of trauma in our lives, some big, little, medium and large, that they're all a tool that empower us. And I want people to be motivated by those imperfect loves that I was talking about earlier, to see some commonalities in their stories with mine potentially, and to see that we're all doing the same thing. This isn't unique. My story isn't unique in that way. Like, we all have our hills to climb, and it's not the view from the top that really matters. It's the ascent. And sometimes I think in this society, we get so focused on it all has to look like this. You have to be at the top of your game. And sometimes just moving forward is enough. That's my mom's story. Is my mom literally throughout her whole life was just putting one foot in front of the other as life was trying to knock her down. And so when they read our stories, I want them to see the beauty in the ascent and to not get so caught up in how things are supposed to look. They don't have to be perfect. That actually, the imperfect kind of love is the real kind of love. And that sometimes to get to that, you need to have tough conversations, good conversations too. But sometimes you need to break through the things in your family that aren't talked about. The quote that I have in the beginning of my book is, there is no secret that time does not reveal. And this is true in families. It's right. My mom comes from a generation where nobody talked about anything. Well, that didn't do us any good, and maybe we're over talking today with the young generation. Maybe they're talking a little too much, but the talking is where the healing is. And the healing is the ascent. And I want people to not get so caught up in having things have to be a certain way.
How do you initiate that uncomfortable conversation?
Well, of course it comes over time, right? You don't sit your teenager down and say, oh, here's mommy's, all the skeletons in her closet. I think it's the evolution of the parent-child relationship where as the child matures, it becomes more, not a friendship per se, but more of a peer-to-peer relationship. And actually, I just had an interview with a wonderful woman, Catherine Cox, and she told me in our conversation, she goes, I literally just sat my 3 boys down who are in their 30s and told them something they didn't know about me. And she said, and I said, well, how'd that go? And she said, they were so grateful that I told them. And they said they felt closer to me. And so it's something that I think evolves over time. And, don't take your secrets to your deathbed, because guess what? Somebody's going to find out.
Is it possible to create an internal environment where you can be vulnerable without fear?
I think there's always a layer of fear to it. But don't let the fear stop you. Right? I was terrified that this book was going to come out, Terry. Terrified. People that had worked for me in my previous career in technology were going to read things about me as a kid that, I would have never told them in a business environment, but here they were going to read my story. I was terrified about so many things, but then I was empowered. And that's the thing, is fear is a step to empowerment. And I think you have to let go of the fear. Of course, you have to be gracious, and you don't want to spill the tea in a way that hurts people. You don't want to do that. But to your point, vulnerability is the way that we all connect. And to my earlier point, I think society is so focused on everything has to look and be a certain way. And actually, the vulnerability is what makes us all feel connected.
Vulnerability is a worthy goal, but it's hard to be vulnerable.
Not everybody can do what I chose to do. And I'm not saying everybody should. I'm a mix of introvert and extrovert. And there's some really big introverts where I do not recommend doing this. However, in one-on-one conversations or in smaller settings, yes, show your vulnerability. That's the power of being human, isn't it?
What has been your family's reaction to both sides of then?
There was a lot of fear around that, of my family, what they would think about the book and my take on my story. I think the one thing that I want to say is you can have 6 people at a dining room table. Nobody is going to walk away with the same memory of that event. And so the one thing I do want to say is there's a lot of people involved in my story. It's me. It is me. It's what happened to my mom, not exactly how it happened. It is my emotional memory of my childhood. But of course, everybody's going to take a different, and my family is going to take a different take on those experiences and those scenes. But I'm definitely writing from the female side of this story. So for my brother and his birth father and all of the people involved on that side, I can't say what their feelings are, right? This is my take on my maternal connection to my mom, who had to do a horrific thing when society asked single, unwed, pregnant women to abandon their babies. And it's a part of society that's not talked about very often, but it happened to millions of young girls and impacts families today.
The book is Both Sides of Then, Finding Love After Abandonment. And the podcast is About Your Mother, both created by our special guest, Jennifer Griffith. More information at her website, jennifergriffith.com, and you can get Both Sides of Then wherever cool books are sold. I wish we had another 2 hours to dig deeper into this story.
Let's do it. And I do have resources on my website about family secrets, how to ask questions of your mother, how to foster this connection that I was talking about. So I really want to promote it for people.
Jennifer Griffith, thanks for a great conversation.
Thank you, Terry.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.